Hey everyone, wanted to make a video to help you get started on Lab 0102. And before I do that though, and this will be that video, I wanted to introduce Jim Kaufman, and so he's here with me. Jim Kaufman is a employee, works with me, co-worker of mine at Rankin, and he has, he's going to be helping out in this course to kind of help us through in different areas, and so he has a good background in this industry. And so I'm going to shut up and maybe Jim, if you don't mind.
Sure. Hi, nice to meet you all. I've been in the software industry for a little over 20 years now. Worked at some of the top companies in St. Louis, and also some contracting companies for different projects for the government. So I'm here to help you out, and looking forward to working with you.
Yeah, very cool. And so just wanted to take a minute to introduce Jim because he will be around. He is a member of our Discord channel. And so, again, maybe at some point in the future, maybe you'll get some lectures from him. But again, you're going to have two instructors, essentially, to help you out. And so let's go ahead and get started on this lab. Now, this lab 0102, is the beginning of our final project. And so this class is a little bit different. It's I'm a big fan of the final project in this class because it's a semester-long project. Up until now, your projects that you've done have been smaller in scope. They have not been full semester-long projects. And so this project's going to be a little bit different. I kind of work through different phases. What we're going to build is called an issue tracker, or I like to think of it as a ticketing system, a help desk ticket, or a bug tracker. It could go by a lot of different names, but if you think of a help desk ticketing system, then you're going to be familiar with what we're going to be building. The reason we're building this is because it is we took the idea from this particular YouTube video. So we at Rankin, some of your instructors, we kind of got the idea from inspiration from this guy at coderfoundry.com, and we said, yeah, let's bring that into our class. And so I'm going to help you get started on this lab. And again, this lab is due this week, and so please, before you get started, I would say let's go ahead and watch this video built into the lab. Take 20 minutes and watch it to understand why we're building what we're building and what we're building. And so the first step in creating this lab is to watch this tutorial. Now I'm going to add the link once I actually finish recording it. But what I'm going to do here is to get started is I'm going to create a GitHub repo, and I'm actually going to do this a little bit differently than I typically do for this class. I'm going to create a new repository, and some of these settings are going to be a little bit different, so please, I'm going to ask you to follow along with these steps if you're in my class, and this will be just issue tracker. And so this is my issue tracker. I will make it public. And what I'm going to do differently is I'm not going to add a README, a git ignore, or a license because of some of the conflicts I've had in recent weeks working with deploying these pieces of software to Google Cloud. I think the git ignore is causing the problem. So I'm going to go ahead and create the repository. And so here's my issue tracker. And the next step is to share this with me. So watch the lab, and I will make a note. Share with GitHub user Evan Gudmestead. Share or collaborate. Add your instructor as a collaborator to your repository. Okay, and my GitHub user is Evan Gudmestead. Okay, so we'll just kind of take this text down here a little bit. And again, so to add an instructor as a collaborator, you're going to click on settings, and you're going to click collaborators. You'll type in your password, and you'll be able to search for me, add people, and you should be able to search by my username and just select the collaborator and let me have access to your repository, obviously for grading purposes. Okay, now once you have added me as a collaborator, we need to clone this repository. So I'm going to go ahead and clone it. And I'm going to clone it where on my computer? Well, I'll put it in this folder here. And let's see. I have issue space tracker here. So I shouldn't have any conflicts. I'm going to clone issue tracker. And it's an empty repository, and that's a warning, and that's fine. So this issue tracker is what I'll be opening up in Visual Studio Code. So we can open it this way, or we can just open up an empty Visual Studio Code and file, open folder, and kind of go about it this way. Issue tracker, no space. Okay, now if you watched my video from yesterday, I took all these steps and explained every step when I was creating the new BellevilleRunningClub.com. So I'm not going to be as thorough in explaining the different pieces, but we'll go through the steps again, and that will help. So let's go ahead and start off by opening a terminal. So a new terminal and installing React with the command npm create vite at latest, and I think it might be npm install vite at latest. Oh no, I got create. I got it right. Okay, and the project name. This is the subfolder. I like just call it my front end subfolder. React, JavaScript. Go into that front end folder. Do an npm install for the dependencies. npm run dev. Now, I'm going to say this up at the front. You know, obviously all the code that we're adding here, I'm going to need you to push that to your repository so I can grade it, right? So just keep in mind all this code that we're adding at the end of this, I will push this to my repo so that you guys can see it, and also you'll need to do that so that I can grade it. And to run this, we'll check this out. And I can see that my React page is running. And now, just to kind of make an initial change, I'll go into here and I'll say h1 issue tracker, and I'll throw my name on it. Issue tracker 2024. Okay, and it's still running on local hosts, and so I just got a big heading there, really ugly, but it gets the job done. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is get this ready for deployment. You do an npm build script. So npm run build, and that's going to create a dist folder with my static files in it, and basically get that ready for deployment on Google Cloud. Now, next up, we'll go back up a directory. We'll do an npm init command to get our package JSON. Issue tracker is my package name, version 1. Issue tracker for tracking software bugs. Again, watch the video so you understand what an issue tracker is. For tracking software bugs during the software development life cycle. Sure, entry point main file we can name index. Git repository. Let's copy that in. Issue tracker Evan Gudmestead, author, and sure, MIT license. Is this okay? Yes. Now, this will create the package.json in the root folder. The next thing we need to do is create our index JavaScript file. I'm going to make a couple of changes here. I'm going to add a type of module so that we have ES6 modules, and I'm going to add a couple scripts. I'm going to have a start script, which is going to say node, and I'm going to have a start dev script, which is nodemon index.js. So one nodemon is our dev command, and I'm going to modify this in a little bit, but for now, that's where we'll start. I'll come back to this start dev script because I think there's more to it. Back to index.js, let's just console log hello world so that when we run our start script, npm run start, we get hello world spit back. Now I'm going to just pretty much bring in the code from yesterday that I wrote. So please watch that video from yesterday about the Belleville Running Club rebuild of that website. So I explain everything in detail. But today, so here's my BRC site, and I can explain some of this. But here's my index.js, and if I just kind of reference this code, I'm going to type exactly what I have in that file just to get everything up and running. Const app equals express app.use express URL encoded app.use express.static front end dist app.listened port arrow function curlies, and console is running. So very bare bones, and then I will make one backend route to a app.get to an API route, and I just want that API route to respond with hello world. So now if I run my run script, cannot find Express, so we have to install Express, npm I express. So we bring in that dependency. So now our package.json recognizes Express. And let's run our application server. It says port is not defined, so we need to define that variable. How did I miss this line? We'll say port 3000 or get it from a .env file. So this should be port 3000. And one last thing is I want this to say server is running on local hosts colon port. So my console log gives me a clickable, beautiful, and this shows me my front end React, and if I go /API, I hit my backend route that says hello world. So to make this actually a little bit more, you could say hello world from the backend route. So the key thing here is to serve up a front end and serve up a back end from one project. Okay, so we've definitely demonstrated that. Now, this is on localhost, and thankfully that's nice and easy. The hard part is getting this then deployed. Deployment is always another level of troubleshooting, and we're gonna deploy on console. You saw my chess.com. I am an active chess player. If any of my students want to play me in chess, I enjoy that. Sometimes I get whooped, sometimes I win. I'm going to create a new project, and these are my different projects, and you are limited, by the way, with these free credits, how many projects you get. So I'm kind of worried that I've got too many projects going, but we'll see if this works. Now, billing account for education, and I'll say issue tracker 2024 will be my name. Issue tracker 2024, no organization. Let's see if we can spin that up. Let's select that project. Thankfully, we have a nice, easy project ID, issue tracker 2024. So to deploy, again, there's setup here. So you have to watch the prior videos to do this setup. You should have your Google Cloud terminal tools installed. And so now we need to set the project. And so GCloud set project is what we're looking for. Here's our command. It's GCloud config set. And you can kind of see right here, GCloud config set project by the project ID. We can paste that, and then we just change project ID to be a copy of our project ID. So we've updated the project. Now we just need the deploy command. And we're deploying to what's called Cloud Run. And so I think I can tab up and get to my Cloud Run command. So you can, here it is, GCloud run deploy, and this is not BRC service. A lot of this is kind of magic going on behind the scenes, but this is what's called a serverless environment on Google Cloud. And so, yeah, it's Cloud Run is what Google calls this serverless technology. But you know, if you're following the steps, these are the steps to deploy. There's more to learn about serverless technology. That was called BRC service. We'll call this issue tracker-service. Now, when you do this for the first time, you got some additional questions. Source code location is the current directory. And do you want to enable these APIs? The answer is yes. And choose your region. 32 for me, US Central. Yes to that question. Allow unauthenticated users, yes. And it spins and waits, so I'll pause. Okay, just finished spinning, and you can see the service URL with a live URL on the internet. Hold down Control and hit click. It'll open up. We have success. When you see our React component showing the issue tracker 2024, that's the front end. That's all we're doing with the front end for now. We'll come back to the React, and then you could do /API and hit your backend route. So this is great. The only problem that I have with my own setup is I don't have a git ignore, which means this node modules will be copied up to my GitHub repo, which is not necessary. That node modules is big. I don't know if it's, you know, a gig big or bigger. So I can actually inspect this node modules and show you how big this folder is. Well, I say it's big. That's only 2 meg, but that's a lot of files. 483 files, 108 folders. It's not necessary. But now I've got this, and I can push this to GitHub as I can close this and come back. And just to demonstrate, I use, again, as I've mentioned, I've used Tortoise Git. So you can right click Tortoise Git and commit to master. So here's different options here for Tortoise Git, but I'm going to do my first commit, and I'm going to click all the files, and I'm just going to say initial project creation, or just, you know, init project. That kind of says the same thing. I'll do a commit and push. And now we have pushed to my repo, and we have launched to GCloud. Now I'm going to say, I've taught this class many times, and getting deployment in so early is an important step because it only gets harder the longer you wait. So if you deploy and redeploy as you go along, it's going to lead to a lot less problems. And so now we're kind of on step number 2 on the lab, right? So this kind of finishes step 1. And now we're ready to get into step 2 and so on. And so what I'm going to do is this lab is basically broken down into users and it's broken down into bugs. And so to kind of get you ready for this, I'm going to do this for my users and then ask that you do a similar process for the bugs. Okay, and so again, this is something you're going to want to do for this lab. Code along with me, and then you'll do the rest on your own. But this is the initial setup. Now, to kind of open this back up, issue tracker. Okay, so to continue on with this, the next couple of packages I want to install, I'm going to install my .env package and my debug package. These are 2 packages that I will use. And in my index.js file, I'm going to bring in my .env. So import .env from .env, and then you say .env config. It's going to allow us to use a .env file. So create a new file, .env, and let's change our port just to make sure it's wired up. We'll say port equals 2024. And so now I should be getting my port from my env file. So when you do this, .env.config, it sets up the process.env so that you can read from that env file, and then this is your variable name. So the short version of what the .env file is these are environment variables that are typically not shared with the internet. So these are, these can be more secure variables, things like your connection strings to your databases and maybe some passwords, some sensitive information can be stored here that generally speaking you don't share that with the internet. So these are just sensitive variables is what I would consider them that your application will use. Now, if I run npm run start and it says localhost 2024, we know that we're reading that variable from the .env file, and we know we've brought that in properly. The next thing I want to do is bring in my debug. And so I'm going to import debug from debug, and I'm going to call this variable debug my server. App:/server. Okay, what this is going to do is replace my console.logs. The debug package is a fancy way of having fancy console logs. And so they do end up being troubleshooting tools that we use, and we can replace this console log with a debug server command. Now, in order to use this, I typically bring it in on my package JSON. So there's actually a switch here. I believe it's -r. One second here. Let me find this command. Okay, it is a switch R. So the start dev command is nodemon -r .env/config. And now when I run start dev script, it should be configured to work with my .env file. And in my .env file, we need to have and I'm slowing down here because second. So getting debug to work, we're going to add this debug variable, app:*. This allows any debug channel starting with app:, and we created that debug channel. We'll start with the lowercase a, app:*server. So again, few steps to getting this debug to work. Step 1 is importing it. Step 2 is throwing it on the switch in that package JSON. So when we run start dev, it does know to pull from .env. I think the start script automatically pulls from it. It's not there, but I believe it does. We can test that. But anyways, add this switch is kind of step 2, and then create our debug server. All this allows us to go to here and say debug server. And now our console log is color coded, and we should be able to run nodemon as well. npm run start dev script, and missing npm run. I always do this. Package JSON, npm run start -dev. It says missing script. npm run start dev. Well, that's a new one. Nodemon. Oh, I got an extra quote right here. There's my problem. My line was not correct. Okay, so now we got, this is really nice. So what this allows me to do, this nodemon, is I can come in here and I can make a change, and as soon as I save this file, and I'll add the word now, server is now, and watch, as soon as I hit Control S, it reboots my server, right? So that saves me the keystrokes of having to shut my server down and reboot my server every time I make a change to my source code. So that's really nice. So again, getting the debug package working, and getting nodemon working, and getting our .env working are good steps for the rest of the semester. Okay, the next step is to start making some various backend routes so that we can, begin to mock up what an issue tracker is going to do. And what I'm going to do is CRUD operation on books. And so I'll just choose books. I got books or users. I could do either one. But I'm just going to choose books. And so what I'm going to do here, so all these routes, you could put them right in your index file, but that's not considered best practice. We want to kind of keep our routes outside of the main source code for our Express server. So we're going to kind of take that responsibility out of this main file and put it in another source code, in another file, if you will. So the organization here, as far as where do we want to put these routes at? I'm going to make a folder here. So here's a new folder. I'm going to make an API folder. Actually, let me make it routes. So I'll make a routes folder, and then I'll say API. So kind of two folders, a routes folder, then an API, and then here's my book.js. Now these are backend routes. Again, this is going to allow us to kind of eventually call our database and work with the database and add new, and I say books. Why am I saying books? This is bugs, not books, bugs. If I'm going to the lab, I've got a user module or a bug module. So again, I could do either one. I guess I'll do users because it's first. Sorry if I was confusing when I'm doing book. That's from a prior semester. Again, so I'm going to create user.js. Okay. So pull this lab over here. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to basically link this server to this user.js. And so what I'm going to do is in this user.js, in order to do that, I'm going to import Express just like I did on the last one. Importing Express, and what we wind up doing is we make something called a router, and that's basically going to route you from this file to this file. Again, we're just kind of, I think of it as linking these two things together. So in order to do that, it's kind of a miniature, I think of this Express router as a miniature application, a mini Express, if you will. And I will do router.get, and I'm just going to do /list. This is going to be like a listing all of the books. Okay, so if I hit a listing of all the books, I'm going to do a I'm going to say list all books route. Hello from list all books route. And then we have to export our router. So export router as user router. So this is kind of a named export. We're calling this router with one route on it, user router. Okay, so this is the process of linking this file to this file and allowing it to have this route. So back here, we need to bring in the user router. So this is our export user router here. So back on my index, we're going to have a new import up at the top. Import. We have a named export. So this is user router from, and it fills in the path. Root directory routes API user, and you do need the .js at the end. All right, so that's step one, kind of make this router, export that router, you add one route, and bring in user router here. Now, we install this route as some middleware. So we're going to say app.use and our route will be /API/user, user router. Okay, this is an important thing now because this is kind of the end of that little chunk of code. But the full route to get to this list, the listing of the book, listing of the users, I keep saying all books. To list all the users, the full path becomes /API/user. That's the first portion of the route. And then /list. So I have this route here, which is just a generic route that's /API that says hello world. But now I have this other route that's /API/user/list. Now if I boot this up and I go /API/user/list, you can see that we get the response, hello from the list all users route. So this is a backend user route, and we have now linked these two things together. I essentially don't need this route anymore. This is kind of useless to me. Okay, and we're ready to begin making our various routes for users. And so if all of this has been a little confusing why we're making these different routes, let me drive the idea home. And so now I've got a JavaScript file here with a router on it, and I'm going to make a variable of, I'm going to make an array of users. And let's see if my trying to get IntelliSense to bring me in user1, password of password, comma, okay. So you can get the idea is what we have is an array of JavaScript objects. And these are, you know, JSON objects, so it comes with key, colon, value, key, colon, value. And our keys are just usernames and our passwords are passwords. If I go to the lab and I look at what does the lab ask of me, implement a small API for users. It says this route returns a full array of JSON, and it doesn't really say what kind of data goes into our users. You can fill this with whatever you want. First name, last name, given name, address. You could put whatever data you want in here. But the point is when I hit the list route, it needs to respond with that users. So what I would do is I would just respond with a status code of 200. So I would say res status 200, which is a successful request, .json, and send back my users. Okay, so this is just give me all of your users. I've got 3 users, and to boot this up, again, this is like a backend route. So eventually we're going to be reading out of a database. There is no longer an API route, so it is API user list is my full route. And you can see it responds with my data. And so kind of the first requirement there of our lab is to list all users at that path. Again, I want to go through this one more time because the pieces are important. /API/user/list is pieced together on our Express server. The first half is /API/user. Notice there's no slash here. There's no / at the end here. But there is a / at the beginning of my list. So /API/user/list. And that is the full path to result in API user/list. Now I need get a user by its ID. Well, my users don't have IDs. Right, so I will say user ID :1, user ID :2, user ID :3. So in order to get a user by the ID, they need IDs. I'm just going to make them integers. And I'm going to introduce a new tool called Postman. I don't know, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to need to introduce Postman here. So Postman is a tool that allows us to have a front end without a full front end. And so we do have a front end built in React, but until we actually build out a React site, we need to be able to test our backend routes without quickly, I would say. And so that's what Postman does. It allows us to test our backend routes quickly. So let me open up Postman, and I'm going to close all the tabs that I've opened from the past. I need to sign in. So you will want to download Postman, make an account, and sign into it. And so this is just a free tool on the internet. Just go out there, say download Postman. And I'm going to give you the crash course on how to start using Postman quick and easy. Okay, so go ahead and download Postman. Download whether you're on Windows or Mac or whatever. And install it, create an account, log into your account. And, go ahead and pause this video and take those steps. And when you open Postman, it should look like something like this. And so what you have here are these different collections, and I've worked on different things over the last couple of years. And so we're going to start by creating a new collection. And this is HTTP. And did I create a new request or a new collection? Let me click this plus button. Create new collection. That's what I wanted to do. Blank collection. And I'm just going to call this issue tracker 24. Okay, so here's my issue tracker 24. And now that I have this, I can make my first request. And so I'm going to call this get all users. And I'm going to put in the full path, http://localhost:/. I'm running on what port? I'm running on 2024. And API users list. So this is listing all of my users. It might be user singular. Let me check. It is user, and I always make this mistake, singular versus plural. And now you can see it returns my array of users back. And so just like I got the array of users in the browser, this allowed me to get it into Postman. And so you're going to notice I named this request get all users. Well, here's the next thing is we're going to get an individual user by their ID. So now that we have Postman, and we're going to use Postman instead of the browser for the most part going forward. Let's get a user by ID. So this is back here. And if I go back here to the lab, it's get API user : ID. So this is before I had /list. This colon, when you see this in a route, that means that this is a variable. And so this variable obviously can store different pieces of data. It could store 1, 2, 3, or what have you. And so to do this, I'm going to say router.get : user ID. So when I hit this route, so instead of doing /list, if I do /1, and I'm putting this in this order on purpose, even though it is incorrect. I'm going to point this out before I do this. This order is incorrect. This user ID is going to need to go above the list, and I'll explain why in a moment. So this user ID is stored in the URL. We're going to pass this via the URL. Well, to read the URL, we're going to make a JavaScript variable called ID equals, and you can kind of see whether we parse it to an int or not, it should be okay. I'm not going to parse it to an int. But the user ID, so this variable right here, is created right here. So this is our variable user ID that when we say rec.params, this says read the parameter variable user ID. And what I want to do now, I'm just going to just do a console log ID. So just to test this, and I'll do a res.status 200, dot send. I'm just going to send a little. So I'll do a console log and I'll do a res.status. User ID with ID 2 is requested. That allows me to go back to Postman, create a new request. I'm going to call this get user by ID. It's going to localhost 2024. It's very similar to this one. But instead of putting list, I'm going to put 1. And I'm going to hit send. Okay. User with ID of 1 is requested. And if I hit my list, we are still getting my users. Yeah, this order is right. I said the order was wrong. Let me show you what happens if you put this in the wrong order. If you put the variable first, right, what it's going to interpret, it's going to interpret the word list as your variable. So I'm going to point out here that if I go user/1, it says user with ID of 1 is requested. But now if I go to my user list, it says user ID with list is requested. So for this reason, here's the rule that you have to remember when you're creating these routes. You must list the dynamic routes before listing the static routes. I said that wrong. I said you must list the static routes, static routes before listing the dynamic routes. And so this ensures that you can do both. You can list your user. So here's list and here's user by ID. So now, again, I go back to list. I'm getting my list. And if I choose an ID of 1, we're getting the ID of 1. Of course, I could say 2. But all that this is demonstrating is that you're requesting user 2. You actually have to write the JavaScript to return that user. So here's, now that we have the ID, let's write the JavaScript, which is just a find method. I'll say const user equals our users find, pass in a user, where the user.userID equals the ID variable that's sent in. So this is a find method to query our array. And there's a handful of very useful array methods. This find is particularly useful in many cases. And so you should be familiar with push and pop and find, and we'll go through a handful of them here. And so what I'll then do is I'll say, hey, if the user is truthy, send back the user, else, say user not found. Okay, so if the user is truthy, meaning the user is anything besides, null or what have you, send back that user, otherwise say user not found. What that allows us to do is I hit 2, and there we get user 2. If I say user ID of 1, let's test out a 3. We should have a 3. If I go to 4, it says user not found. And so a couple things in here. That's why we hit the whole week of JavaScript fundamentals before we touched on this. We talked about modules and exporting and importing modules. We talked about useful array methods. We talked about arrays and objects and all the like. So listing a user, getting a user by ID, so far so good. Let's see what's else on the lab. If there's no user, then send the following response. 404, user not found. There's 404, user not found. And I will point out, in Postman, it receives the 404 not found response from your server. So far so good. Let's see, we got to register a new user, so this is adding a new user. This is logging in a user. This is making a change to a user. So the put is going to allow us to edit a user, and then deleting a user. All right. So our next route is a post. Okay, it's worth noting that so far these have been HTTP GET requests. Of course, there's gets and puts and posts. And so, being familiar with the different HTTP methods, I would get familiar with these different HTTP request methods. There's get, there's a post, there's a put, there's a delete. Okay, and so just being familiar that these are different requests that clients can send to servers. And so now we're going to do a post route to register. Well, it's pretty easy on Express to do router.post. And you can kind of see the thing here /register and request object response. So these two objects that are part of these routes represent two different things. The request comes from the client. So anything behind REQ is data sent from the client. By the way, none of that works without that line right there, line 10. So this request object is set up by line 10 to allow you to get into the params, for example, to get into the URL. And then RES represents the response, so sending data back down to the client from the server. So these are very traditional in these routes. Additionally, sometimes you see a third one here for error handling, which we will kind of bring in eventually. Not now, but it is kind of common to see a third argument in that list. But let's go to register. And this one's not too bad. So remember, what comes from the client is in request. So let's go ahead and arrow function this with some curlies, put a semicolon here. And so remember, the rec object has a body property that contains the data sent by the client. The first way we use rec is to read from the URL, rec.params, but we also have rec.body. And so I'll say const new user equals rec.body. And so in order to send JSON from a front-end tool, I'm going to add in app.use Express.js. This is something that I probably should have added from the get-go. It allows JSON to be sent from the front end to the back end, so that rec.body can be a JavaScript object of user properties. So all I want to do now is push my new user. So that's going to add my new user to the end of the array. But I also just want to console log my new user. Console log new user. Okay, and I will just respond res status 200. Just say user added. Okay, so now to test this, we're going to go to Postman. I'm going to add a new thing here, http:/localhost 2024 API/user/register. And to send information across in the body, we have to click, instead of params, we're going to click on body, and then form encoded, And I'll just say ID of 100, and I'll say first name Evan. And if I make this a post, okay, so here's the next part, is I gotta, instead of making a GET request, this is now a POST request. And there you could see it says user added. And if I go back to get all users, you could see my user ID of 100 with Evan has been added. Now, what does the lab want? The lab probably wants some different fields. Email, password, full name, given name, family name, and role. Okay, so I can kind of meet the lab requirements on Postman. There's a couple things to do here, right? So on my request, I'm gonna name this. If I save this, it should. It's important to save your requests. If I close tab, I want to save changes, and I want to call this get user by ID. I always recommend saving your requests, and then you save it into the right workspace, issue tracker 24, right? So that you can kind of close these down and then come back to them, right? Here's my get all users. Here's my get user by ID. Now this one, I want to save it, right click. If you close it, save it. Issue tracker, I'm going to say add new user. Okay, and so on my new user, I need to make sure, it says, take a look at the lab, it says the following data must be provided. And so I need to see that there's an email, a password, full name, given name, family name, and role. And if those aren't there, then I don't want to proceed. Okay, so new user should have all of those properties. And so I could, again, using Truthy, I could say if new user dot email and well, we could just, if there's no email, email is required, and hit return. So client side error 400, email is required, and then return. So now if I try and add my user again body and then form encoded, I don't have an email, and I would expect that to not work. So it did work, so let's troubleshoot. If new user doesn't have an email, so here, hold on a second. New user doesn't have an email property. So this is where I need to bring in debugging. And so I'm going to make a debug channel. Import debug from debug. And here this will be app user. So I've got a new channel called my user channel. Back here I've got my server channel. And here I've got my user channel. And I'm going to console log. And I'm sorry, not console log. I'm going to debug user. New user email is new user dot email. I want to see kind of how this is coming across. And so when I hit my route with no email, oh, now it says email required. Maybe I probably just had to reboot my server. I probably didn't save my source code. So I'm getting my error message here. Email is required. That's what I would expect. And here it says new user email is undefined. So that would be a true statement and require that. And we can write a bunch of if statements. If no user's password's required. What are the different fields? Let me look at these different fields. Full name. If the new user doesn't have a full name, now full name, you know, is your first and your last name together, obviously. So I can take that requirement off. As long as they've got a first name and a last name, we can build the full name, right? So we'll say your given name is your first name. And I would even say first name is required. Most people don't call your first name your given name, but there's a difference, right? Some cultures, your family name is actually your first name. So that's the difference between. If there's no family name, last name required, and we do ask for a role. If not, new user.role, we can say role is required. So these are just validation. This is data validation. Now, back on Postman, we could say first name, we change that, is now your given name. Family name. Email. Password. And role. So if we do all the things right, then we get a user added, and what we should do is our success message. We should say, instead of just sending a string back, we can send back JSON. And these are single quotes versus backticks. The backticks allows me to put in these placeholders, and I'll say user new user we can stringify our new user and just spit it all out in a string. So new user is a JavaScript object, and if you stringify it, it'll kind of put it all in one big old string. So now when I add my new user, if I can resave, reboot my server, add my new user, that's pretty ugly, but it does say user with all my information added successfully. So if you don't want all that, we don't have to stringify my new user. We could just say new user dot given name, and it'll say Evan added successfully, right? So every time, by the way, every time I'm rebooting my server, I'm resetting my data. Now it says Evan added successfully. Yeah, just kind of following this routes path just to show that these are two different folders. API, routes folder, API folder. Even though they kind of look like one folder name, these are two different.
One more quick question, because I know you want to start here again. So,
so another, I'm just here working with Jim, and at one point we were naming our file extensions MJS, and that was those ES6 modules. But we kind of handle that by changing the type to module. When you change the type to module, you can either name your extensions MJS or JS. And yeah, so that's adding a new user. Now with this, it kind of stands to reason that there's a couple of things here, right? So noticing that our register user needs an ID. So our new user doesn't have an ID. Well, our users has a length. So we can just add one to that length, and that can be our new user's user ID. So let's do that. And so on my register route, I'm going to take that debug out. I'll say const or no, here's what we'll do. We'll say new user.id. We're going to add a user ID. New user.user ID equals user's length plus 1. So we're just going to add 1 to our array, and so this will be user ID of 4. So if I register my user and it says Evan added successfully, and I do it twice, we add Evan twice. If I go back to getting all my users, I should see Evan on there twice with 2 different user IDs, right? And if I reboot my server, Evan goes away. So I come over here and I Control S again, restart my server. I go back to listing all my users. Evan goes away. That's why at the end of the day, we want to save this to a database. This array of objects is just saved in RAM. It's not saved in persistent storage of any way. So rebooting the server, you lose all your data, and there's the problem. So that handles one thing, is that our register, our users now have unique IDs. But now, our users have different data, and that's fine. This user, these users are just dummy users. We can fill it in with real data as needed. But just to notice, our first 3 users don't have all the required fields, but that's fine. I mean, it's so there's the register route. We send back a 400. And it says specify what was invalid, so we did that. So the status is 400. And then the send is just a string that says what's required. And we can add a type. So dot type is text plain. And that's just a little bit more information for Postman to use, but really not all that important. So if there's already a user with the provided email address, then send the following response. Okay, so here's a little bit more validation. You just saw how I added my own user twice, and now we're not wanting that. So we're going to see if I can find a user by the email address. So here, I'll do something like this. I'll say, we're going to do a find. So I'll say const search equals users.find. Okay. So search for a user. So if a user is found, so if search user is truthy, then we're going to say user already exists. Otherwise, all of this is in my else block kind of deal. And so I'll tab that over. But this, now line 72 is the end of my else block. So all of this is only if the user doesn't exist. So if I reboot here, now I go to get my users. I've got 3 users. I go to add my user once. Evan added successfully. This should say user already exists. And now if I go to list all users, Evan is only listed once. So you can get some more validation that way by adding a user. add the new user to the array, 200, new user registered. You could see I sent back basically, sent that back. Great. So we have adding a new user. Now, currently only the users that I add are going to be able to log in because those are the only ones with a password. So we have to add a user first, else we have to change our seed data. This is our seed data. Only new users will, at this point, have an email and a password. So now at the end of that route, router.post ends right there. I'm going to say router dot, the next method is a post route, router dot post, the login route, and const user equals rec.body. Rec.body again comes from the client. It is a JavaScript object with the fields in it, which should be if not user email, we say email is required in return. Kind of the same thing that we did before. If the user doesn't have a password, then send the password back. Now, we could tie this into like one big else if block. If there's no email, else if there's no password, otherwise there is an email and a password. And here you can kind of see, this is Copilot, it's incredibly smart. We're doing a users.find to see that a user's email and that user's password is equal to user.password. So find a user where that user's email matches user email. User is from rec.body. So basically, what's in the array, does what's in the array match what was sent from the client, and does what's in the array for the password match what was sent from the client? And if that's true, you says user logged in. Otherwise, we say invalid credentials. So there's kind of 4 outcomes here. Outcome 1 is emails required, else passwords required, otherwise success, otherwise invalid credentials. So that's the ways through the decision tree, if you will. So let's save that up. Let's register my new user. Again, EA Gudmestead at Rankin, password is password. Okay, Evan added successfully. So let's make a new request. This is a post request. http://localhost 2024 API user login. We're going to send data via the body, form encoded, and let's just send email without a password. So if we just send an email, should say password is required. If we send password, we get user logged in. If we forget to send the email, it says email is required. If we send a wrong password, we get invalid credentials. So we just tested our login route against our new user and all the different spaces. My request name, as I'm saving this with Control S, is going to be login user route inside of my issue tracker 24 workspace. All right. Let's see that we met the requirements. Verifies credentials, required fields, 400, please enter your login credentials. It says welcome back. I said, what did I say? I said user logged in successfully, same difference. If they do not match invalid credentials, please try again. Okay, wonderful. Now we have a put, and notice the route is with a variable again. So this is going to be rec.params instead of rec.body. And this is going to be updating a user by their ID. And it says the following data may be provided. So none of these are required. These are all optional fields at this point. And so let's code the route first. Router.put okay. And this is a little bit differently. I'm going to say const ID equals rec dot params dot. Now again, this user ID variable needs to match the name here on line 95, user ID. So I need to read const user equals users dot find. So I'm going to find the user by their ID. So this is the user, you can call this the user to update. Okay, so we're going to hit our array and see if there's a user to update. And then const updated user equals rec.body. So again, so this is interesting because we're getting some data sent across via the route, and we're also going to send data across on rec.body. So we're sending data across on params and on rec.body. And so I'm going to say if there's a user to update, in other words, the ID is a valid ID, because they might send an ID that's not a valid ID. If there's a user to update, there's a nice little for loop that you can use here. And say, okay, for each key in the updated user, so we're doing a for in. This is called a for in loop, right? So there's for loops, there's for of loops, there's for in loops. So we're looping through our updated user, which is our JavaScript object, right? For each key in our updated user, we're going to update the updated user's key to that value, updated user's key. So this for loop says, hey, you know, for all the data that's sent across on rec.body, we're going to loop through each property and update our users to updated, for example, given name or family name, to the updated user's given name or family name. Okay, so this is a intermediate level to more advanced level for loop, I feel like. We haven't written a lot of for loops like this, but it really... So now this user to update should have all the new values of our updated user that was sent across in rec.body. And then we have to save this back into our array. So we've updated the user in this variable, but we have to then update the user into the array. So I'm going to save the updated user into the user's array. And I'm going to do that by finding the ID. So I'll say const index equals basically getting the user by their ID. So this is find index, which is different than the other query I ran, which was find. So this is finding the user's index. So we're going to say, okay, update, in this case it'll be the third index would be my new user. So this would be index 0, this would be index 1, this would be index 2. If I add a new user, it would be index 3. So this is giving me back that int, that integer, that is their position in the array. And if the index is basically found, if it's not equal to a -1, update the user sub that index to the user to update. And so this updates that user in the array. And finally send back a success message. We'll do a res.status 200.send backtick user updated successfully. Now all of this needs to go inside my if there's a user to update. If there's a user to update, then do all this, the for loop. Let's kind of break that in like this. Tab all this over so it's easier to see. Okay, if there's a user to update, then do all of this. Else, this is the user to update was not found, and so we'll say user not found, like if there's a user ID of 4. Okay, so we can kind of come in here and let's add a new user. Evan added. If we get all users, okay, there we see that. Let's make our new route that we're going to send across a parameter ID, which my ID is 4. And notice that this is at a put, router.put. So we're going to go router.put, http://localhost 2024 API user 4 body. And I will change my, let's see, my role is currently developer, my password is password. Let's say I want to change my password. Password, new password. Okay, user 4 updated successfully, and if I go back to get all users, you can see my password is now new password. It just updated that one field. And maybe I change my password and my role to administrator. And get all users. And so this is definitely the hardest route theory-wise to kind of follow all of the logic here. This is a tricky for loop. For in, again, I would encourage you to check out the MDN article on for in. Loop in JavaScript, where you can loop through an object and look at each property in the object to help you understand this for loop. And then again, we're doing a find method, or a find index, finding the number it's at in the array. So that is doing the update, definitely, I think, the hardest one. Last but not least is delete, and then I'm going to commit and push my work, and then I'm going to redeploy and kind of show you how that works now that we've got all that set up. So to delete, here we're just going to delete by the user ID, so that's nice and easy. Kind of condense this down. Router, there is a delete method, delete by the user ID. And let's read the user ID. Copilot is crazy good. So here, let's walk through this. Let's read a user ID out of the rec params. So this is coming from the path. Okay. Find the index, and if that index, so again, this is the position in the array 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. If it's a -1, then that is the user not found. So if it's not -1, we're going to run a splice method starting at the index and going for one element. So that says, hey, start at index 2 and splice or remove one element. So remove that position number 2. And so this splice method is doing the delete inside of our users array. And then we say user ID deleted successfully. Otherwise, the ID was not found. So the trick there to remove a user by their index is with splice. These methods could be written in different ways, but definitely can check that out. So now I want to save this. This is my update user. Okay. And last but not least is a delete. 24 API user, and we're going to delete user ID of 4. So you're all right. What's going on? Hi.
Come on in.
Come on in.
Okay.
All right. So added our new user. Let's go to get all users and see. Click that again. Get all users. Okay, there's my user. Got my old password of password. And if I delete my user of 4, user 4 deleted successfully. If I go back to get all users, you can see that I am removed. Now if I try and delete my user again, it says user not found. User ID of 5. User not found. User ID of 3. User 3 deleted. Get all users. We got our 2 users. So what's beautiful about this lab, even though I went at light speed, you guys can rewind this recording, ask questions about the logic, and what's beautiful about this lab is that this exercise 3 is precisely what we just got done doing with users. You're just implementing that logic on your own, and you're doing it with different entities. And so we're listing our bugs. We're listing a bug by an ID. We're adding a new bug. And so what you'll do on your lab for a grade, of course, is doing all this with users, but you're going to add a new file for bug.js. And it needs to be in the right folder. I didn't create it in the right folder, so let me delete this. And right here, add a new file called bug.js. And then just as we did over here, we need to, in our user.js, you'll spin up a router called router. You'll export that router at the end. You'll link to that right here. You'll import your bug router on another, like right here, import bug router from ./routes API bug.js. And then you'll app.use API /user, bug router, right? So you'll wire that up just like I wired up my user. And then you'll start making these routes doing, again, you've got the source code here for my bug router. I'll make this available to you on GitHub. Check in the link in the description. So let's do that next, okay? So just like you, I'm gonna need to push my work. So Evan Gudmestead issue tracker, close, git commit. So push all of your files, and I will say added user routes with array of users. Commit and push. And this is a public repo that you guys will have access to. If I go to my GitHub and my repositories, there's issue tracker. So here's the URL. Of course, you can navigate there or follow the link in description, but you'll have all the source code for that. That'll set you up. The last piece is redeploying this to Google Cloud. So now that I've already done the initial legwork, let's redeploy my issue tracker to Google Cloud. Okay. And that is done in the terminal with the GCloud run deploy, and you name the same service. So this is redeploying it. It gets hard in my opinion because you have three different code bases. You've got the GitHub code base, github.com, you've got your local repository, and you've got your GCloud. And so there's the challenge, but let's redeploy this. And US Central. I'll pause while this deploys. Okay, what's great here is I've got this deployment now done, so you can kind of see that the message is done at my terminal. And if I go now to my /API/user list, you can see that my backend route is responding with my requests. Now, again, you can refactor your Postman to hit this, right? So notice instead of hitting localhost, I could register a user now on my live site that's hitting my live domain. And now when I register a user, this response is coming from GCloud, right? And if I go back here, there you go. So I didn't expect that to actually work because that's two different it's two different front ends, but there you go. So all of my routes that I just created are now deployed to GCloud. So we pushed it to GitHub. More importantly, we got this backend live and working on the internet, which is a great kind of setup for the rest of the semester. And I will add to you, at the end of this video for my students, the amount that I'm throwing at you this week is high of what we've learned and all this new kind of material, but it's really setting us up nicely for the rest of the semester. The last part of this lab, I am going to create another video tomorrow because there's actually one piece of this lab that's left dealing with the front end. Not the most important piece of this lab, but it is one last piece. So I'll call this kind of the starter video. You guys will be expected to get the bugs up and running. Even if you just follow this video tutorial, you'll still get half credit because you've done basically half the lab, or maybe a little less because you haven't done the second. Point is, you'll get some credit for doing this, and we'll check back in and make a little bit front end for displaying users and things like that. So that's where I'm going to cut this one off.